Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, my name is Amanda Sutcliffe-Jones. I am the CSA Director of Communications. I welcome you to the Referendum Survey Community Presentation. Today, we are joined by a sold-out in-studio audience. We have 136 people joining us via webinar, which is a high number, which is awesome. So thank you to those joining wherever you may be located who are joining via webinar. So today we will be hearing from the University of South Carolina Beaufort. They are our survey vendor. We've used them before in the past for previous surveys. We were glad to be working with them again. And we will be hearing from Anton Abraham, who worked with not only myself, but also our staff and our board directly to get this survey out to the community. The community survey was run 2 weeks in the late November and finished up in early December, and we are excited to bring those results to you today. Just as a reminder, if you could mute your cell phones, that would be helpful. So sorry. I forgot that housekeeping item before we got started, so if you wouldn't mind muting those. Just as a safety reminder for those people attending in person, the exits are over clearly marked to your left, and then the restrooms are located in the center. So without further ado, I will welcome Anton Abraham for USCB up to the podium. Anton will walk us through those survey results. We will certainly please hold questions until the survey results have been presented. And as a reminder, we are on webinar, so when we do get to the question and answer portion, I will turn the ask a question on to the webinar participants so you can participate in the Q&A if you're interested, and certainly in the audience as well. We just ask that you clearly speak into the microphone when asking your question so it's heard not only in the in-person audience, but also to those joining via webinar. So without further ado, Anton, here you go. You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for having me again. I was here last year presenting a few survey results, and here I am again. You do hear my charming German accent, so if you can't understand me, please let me know, reach out to me. It is the same issue. I'm telling my students the same. So if you have problems to understand me, please let me know. Otherwise, I will try to speak clearly and introduce to you the survey and the survey results from this survey we conducted in the end of last year. So how this whole thing came about is that we were approached in late September, beginning of October by CSA to conduct another survey. The board was considering a referendum, and they wanted to get a pulse of the community. How do you think about the specific referendum items they were trying to introduce to you? So the pulse or the sentiment was the initial question, and then there was the idea to start a messaging campaign in the community and then to run the survey again to see if they were able to move the needle towards the results they were looking for. So as usual, things changed along the way. That happened here again as well, obviously, but I would like to introduce you now the first results of this proposed survey, or the proposed referendum survey. As Amanda mentioned already, the survey was live for 2 weeks between Monday, November 26th and Monday, December the 10th of last year. It was an online survey and not a paper survey. So each of you received an email invitation about the survey. We reached out to the whole CSA database. So if you were in the database with your email address, you received this invitation. If you were in the database with 2 different email addresses, you received 2 invitations. If you share an email address, you still just received 1 invitation to the survey. So that's how we approached this one. We had 2,884 responses, completed survey responses, of which 54% of the responses we accumulated in the first 48 hours of the survey being live. You are a very active community, and we as researchers are really happy about that. We don't have that too often. The survey also had a lot of open box responses, so it allowed you or the community to give the responses in a written format. I'm not going to present those open box responses to the community today. We did receive in total 136 pages, or about 60,000 words of written responses, and CSA, or the team bit around it, Brett Martin and Amanda, are still combing through these responses. We as an institute consider seriously now to get a text analyzing software to help CSA. We're not there yet, but again, This is not going to be part of the presentation. What we're looking at today is the pure ones and zeros, the percentages. So about the survey, the background information about this. Sea Pines is the oldest large-scale community on Hilton Head Island, and much of our community's infrastructure spending has been deferred, delayed, or unidentified for many years. We are now in a position of trying to catch up. In order to secure the future of Sea Pines and prevent our community from further infrastructure and landscape deterioration, and to address traffic concerns, CSA requires additional funding. We believe this investment is critical to protect your investment in your home. In this survey, we will ask you a variety of questions related to your level of awareness and support of certain community needs, as well as your level of support for the proposed initial terms of a referendum to increase community funding. What I'm reading right now to you is what you saw in the survey. I just wanted to use the opportunity to get to you the same introduction as you saw in the survey. So question number one is, prior to the survey, have you seen, read, or heard of the proposed referendum to amend the Sea Pines covenants to increase community funding to address our infrastructure and landscape deterioration and deficiencies? So 78.5% of you said yes to this answer. So you have heard prior to the actual survey, or that you have heard about this referendum, with 8.9% who weren't sure, and about 12.6% who have not heard anything about this. And that was, again, the whole idea about the survey. We wanted to run this survey instrument in the community to see how aware are you about specific items, to run then the messaging, and then to run the same instrument again to see where we moved the needle, where did we were able to change with the messaging. Then the question for Amanda Sutcliffe, very important, is how did you hear about this one? So emails from CSA is clearly the number one response there with 87.1%. So that's very important in the aftermath about the continued marketing from CSA. Which channel should they use to reach you? Newsletter with 40.5% is followed by that. You see on the bottom other, that was the opportunity for the community to indicate other options if it wasn't listed on this one, which is a total of 18.1%. And that's where we found the responses like Sea Pines homeowner Facebook sites, neighbors, word of mouth, social media, the island package, etc. That's all accumulated in this last response. What we're diving into now are the awareness items. So the goal of the survey was also to inform about specific items. So we used those boxes to inform you about specific issues. So the Institute and CSA, since we are working so long already together, we know about specific issues. They are existing in this community. And now we're diving into those specifics because of prior surveys. We know most of them. So number one was roadway infrastructure management. Roadway repairs and renovations are critical to address traffic, safety, and overall roadway conditions in Sea Pines. In 2016, CSA completed a comprehensive reserve study. The study indicated that our primary roadways were in the need of some type of repair or renovation. This included Greenwood Drive, Sea Pines Drive, Lighthouse Road, and Plantation Drive. These primary roadways are or were in need of at least some overlay of asphalt, and in some cases, like the Greenwood Drive in 2018, an extensive renovation. Last year was the first of 6-year plan to address the roadway infrastructure repairs or renovating along these primary roadways. The study also indicated that many of our secondary and tertiary roadways will require repair and renovation in the near future. Please indicate your level of awareness and support for the following. So this question, question 3, was basically your awareness. Are you aware about these issues? Are you aware of the community needs to address these repairs, renovation, and continued management of the roadways and Sea Pines? 96% of you indicated that you are aware, either aware or somewhat aware, with 4.1% who weren't aware at all about this specific roadway issue. So now we know that 96% are aware, but how many people did support this, that Sea Pines is? Do you support the repair, renovation, and continued management of the roadways and Sea Pines? About 70% said, yes, I do support this one. In the middle, we have 27% with I need more information before I can make a decision, and no, I do not support this action with 3.4%. That's where it starts to be interesting for us, because now we see about a big number of people, in this case 27%, said they need more information before they can make a decision. And that's where we think we can still move the needle, because we assume that those 3.4%, they're probably not going to change their mind in the future, but those 776, there might be a group of people with proper information and explanation what is going to happen with those funds. We may be able to reach them to get them into the yes corner to support these initiatives. Awareness item number 2 was the gate and traffic improvements. There's a few tongue breakers in there, please forgive me. In a survey of property owners conducted in 2015, property owners prioritized gate improvement as a high priority, with 88.9% of owners indicating that gate improvements were either extremely important, very important, or somewhat important. Gate and traffic improvements will help to improve the flow of traffic into Sea Pines. Additionally, CSA currently leases space in the Sea Pines Welcome Center for our pass operations. We intend to provide a long-term location for this operation. CSA is working to develop an alternative location for gate pass and cash transactions. Our goal is to improve the entire experience and traffic flow through process modification, as well as through physical and technologically based improvements at our gates, beginning with the Greenwood Gate and then, when time, access, and funding allow, the Ocean Gate. Other intersections and leisure pass plans will also make roadway, pedestrian, and bicycle traffic safer. Please indicate, the same model here, please indicate your level of awareness and support for the following. So question number 1, or in this case 5, I'm sorry. Are you aware that CSA is developing a plan to establish an alternative location for gate, pass, and cash transactions, improve the entry experience and traffic flow through process modification and through physical and technologically based improvements at our gates? 93.7% said we are aware or somewhat aware about this, with 6.3% indicating that they're not at all aware about this one. Follow-up questions: do you support? And there we have 60.4% who support, 12.1% who do not support those improvements, and 27.6% who need more information before they can make a qualified decision. Again, that's very important for us, as that's the reason why we take the survey. Where can we move the needle? Item number 3, stormwater drainage system care and management. In 2016, CSA conducted a comprehensive study of the stormwater infrastructure and system conditions in Sea Pines. The study was performed by a qualified engineering firm and identified significant deficiencies throughout the system. The study also identified the need for repair and replacement of these systems over the next 20 to 30 years, and then for the continued ongoing maintenance and management of our stormwater drainage system. In conjunction with the roadway drain systems for stormwater, broader stormwater system repairs and replacements are needed for lagoon dredging and bank erosion. These repairs and replacements will not only provide that the stormwater system returns to its original functionality, but will also restore the natural habitat for the wildlife that lives in and around our lagoons and water channels. Please indicate your level of awareness and support for the following. So are you aware of what the community needs addressing the repair, replacement, and continued management of the stormwater drainage system? Deficiencies within Sea Pines, 88.4% said they are aware or somewhat aware about this one, with 11.6% who are not aware about these deficiencies. Level of support, you can see here very clearly that those who do not support these actions, that's a very small percentage, with 2.7% out of 2,869 people answering this question. 68.2% are in support, with 29.1% who need still more information about these initiatives. Item number 4, it's the last one, landscape care and management. In a survey of property owners conducted in 2015, property owners prioritized landscape and maintenance as a high priority, with 90.4% of owners indicating that landscaping and maintenance were either extremely, very, or somewhat important to them. A landscape maintenance preference design survey was also conducted in 2015 and identified that as a whole, survey participants preferred a well-maintained, natural-looking for most types of landscape settings within sea pines, with a more formal, well-maintained setting of plant beds at our entrances and floral displays in some of the more developed settings. Due to our recent storms, the aging of our natural species, the introduction of various invasive species, as well as our own current limited maintenance practices, our landscape and natural but maintained areas and sea pines have deteriorated. CSA has begun the process of repairing and replacing these areas and then maintaining them in a natural manner. Please indicate your level of awareness and support for the following. 91.7% said that they are aware about those community needs. 8.3% were not at all aware, and 65% were in support. 28.2% were not needed more information about this before they could make a decision, and about 7% did not support these actions. All right, so the funding of the community shortfall, that is basically the crux of why we're all sitting here today. The total approximate cost to address the previously mentioned community needs is 5.5 million over the next 7 years. Our anticipated average funds available during that time frame to address these critical needs is 2.9 million. This estimate average annual shortfall based on the next 7 years would be 2.5 million. So let's the need repairs, replacement, restorations, and renovations previously mentioned will need to continue well into the future, while we also address the replenishment of our reserved funds to an acceptable level. Please indicate your level of awareness and support to the following. Are you aware about those community shortfalls of funds to address the previously described critical community needs? 82.7% were aware or somewhat aware about this one, with 17.3% who were not aware. Just remember this slide. We're going to go back to the slide in just a minute again. Do you support this referendum to address the shortfall of funds for the previously described critical community needs? Support with 44%. Those who oppose the action is 12.8%, and the undecided is 43.3%. The proposed initial referendum terms. The proposed referendum to fund the shortfall for the previously mentioned critical community needs, repairs, replacement, restorations, and renovations consist of multiple parts that will be wholly voted for or against. Please review the proposed initial referendum terms. The Sea Pines Resort will increase its annual assessment by 50% from 0.5% to 0.75% of its gross revenue. Number 2, the Sea Pines commercial tenants will commit to an annual fee increase of 100%. Number 3, the Sea Pines residential annual assessment will increase by approximately 28%, $300 for an improved property and $180 for an unimproved property. Number 4 and last, a real estate transfer fee of 0.5% of the sale price of fair market value of a property will be collected on a sale of a transfer of property in the Sea Pines included residential, resort, and commercial properties. Please indicate your level of support for the proposed initial referendum terms. Yes, we support these referendum terms, 47.6%. I need more information, 28.3%. And no, I do not support those referendum terms, 24.1%. If you remember the slide number 11, going back now here. So if you can see, no, I do not support those referendum terms. Oh, and I'm sorry, I am not at all aware about those shortfalls. There we have 492 people indicating that they are not aware about the shortfall of those funds. And of those said that they do not support the referendum, the answer you just saw were 135 people, so 27% of those 492. Yes, they do support the referendum, is 162. And no, they do need more information, it would be 195 out of this 492, which is 40%. That's the geeking out which is happening in the background. So when Brett, Martin, and Amanda have some additional question, how did this group of people answer this set of questions? That what we still do with CSA in conjunction. So again, out of those 492 who are not aware about this shortfall, we can then say how many of them answered question number 13, what we just looked at. Moving forward in the survey now, that something happened what we call looping or jumping. So not everybody in this who answered this question is going to see the next questions. That's why I have to enter this slide. So only those people who said who need more information or who opposed the terms answered the next 3 questions, because we wanted to know, where do we lose you? And how can we change that we bring you back on board? And that's why those in the bucket who support the referendum terms in the first place, we didn't need so many additional information. But again, for those groups, of those 2 groups who are either needed more information or didn't support the referendum, that's where we asked the additional questions number 14, 15, and 16. Community funding contributions from the Sea Pines Resort and the Sea Pines commercial property. So that's referendum term 1 and 2. The Sea Pines Resort, the gross revenue increase, I just read this, as well as the tenant assessment increase will double, and as well as additionally a commercial, last sentence here, a commercial business owners will continue to contribute 1% of their gross revenue to the community service fund. So again, this is a question of, are you aware about those facts, that the Sea Pines Resort said they're going to increase their share, as well as the commercial tenants will be increasing their share as well. So of those, again, in total, 1,512 people in this bucket, 953 were aware of this fact, and 555 were not aware of this fact. So 36.4%. Question 15, the real estate transfer fee. The referendum proposes an amendment to our covenants to include a real estate transfer fee. The transfer fee states that 1/2 of 1% of the sale price of a fair market value of a property would be collected upon the sale or transfer of property. This would include the sale of or transfer of residential, resort, or commercial properties in Sea Pines. While a real estate transfer fee may be new to Sea Pines, it's certainly not new to our neighboring island communities. There are only 2 other large-scale communities on Hilton Head Island that do not have a transfer fee, and they're both less than half of the age of Sea Pines. The real estate transfer fee example: so sale price of $500,000. The transfer fee applied would accumulate to $2,500, which would consist in this example of $500,000 value. Please indicate your level of support for the proposed real estate transfer fee. Sorry, there you go. Sorry, my sweaty hands. There you go. Oh, there we go. 15, that's the one. So 359 who are undecided about this, or about the level of support to the real estate transfer fee, with 304 people indicating, or 20.2%, in support for this transfer fee, and 839 people who do not support, or 56% who do not support this real estate transfer fee. Very valuable information provided there. Residential assessment increase. The referendum proposes, that's item number 4 of the 4 referendum items, proposes that the Sea Pines residential annual assessment will increase by $300 for an improved property and by $180 for an unimproved property. The 2090 annual assessment for an improved property will be $1,076. This rate, combined with a proposed increase of $300, would result to a residential annual assessment for an improved property of $1,376 a year. If the referendum were approved, this would represent an approximate increase of 28%. Even with this increase, we will continue to have the second lowest residential annual assessment of any large-scale community on Hilton Head Island. Please indicate your level of support for the proposed residential assessment increase to fund this shortfall. 31% were in support of this increase of residential assessment. 29% were undecided and needed more information, and 40.3% were opposed to this increase in the residential assessment. Do you intend to vote for the upcoming proposed referendum? It's 6% to indicate that they will not vote, 94% said they will vote. Are you the person who submits the ballot over the vote for your household? That's about 90% indicated that they weren't. They were the one. 4%, 114 were not sure. 175 people. You laugh. I do think that's rather complicated because it's apparently just the primary household owner who's supposed to put the ballot, but you guys know that better than I do. But that just gives us an idea if people know who, if they are the ones voting or not. All right. Are you a Beaufort County registered voter? That's just for us, 55.5% or 1,572 in this case said no, 44.5% said they were. And that's just for us the short version of the answer to get an idea if you're a primary resident or secondary resident. Number 20, do you have any additional questions? Again, if you answered at this point in question number 20, yes, you do have additional specific questions related to those 4 referendum items. That's where you were entering a section where you were able to give open box or open text responses. That's where was the part where we didn't ask any percentage question anymore. We just clicked yes or no, or yes, I wasn't aware, or support. This one was please give your feedback. And those 4 questions between 21 and 24 were the specific ones to the specific referendum items. And number 25 was the general question of do you have the general comments about this referendum. Altogether, again, 136 pages. We are not done going through all those results, but the board is having already a summary of some of those questions, and they're looking at it right now. I would be at this point done with the actual presentations of the ones and zeros, but I am still here to answer your questions if you have any. If this is referendum specific, let's say about the referendum terms, I would ask Amanda and Brett to take over those answers. If you have questions about the survey and the ones and zeros and how we designed and etc., then I would be here to answer your questions. Yes, ma'am. Just a little bit of wrap up before we go. Oh, I'm sorry. No, go ahead. Thank you.
So before we go into questions, I just want to take a quick moment to thank Anton for his presentation, and to his team and our staff and our board and committees who worked really hard to get this survey to a point where we could get it in front of you. And my next thank you goes to you guys, because that's a phenomenal return rate. 38.75% return rate is the highest return rate we've gotten on a survey since I've been here for almost 3.5 years. So I really am very appreciative of the feedback that you guys gave and the time and effort that you guys took to actually participate in the survey. So a couple of questions before we go into some general Q&A. Anton did mention this, so that's a lot of information to go through. You just heard Anton cover it, but our board is working really hard to go through those responses, to go through those questions that you guys had. There's intention for a board workshop to occur for the CSA board members to really dive deeper into not only the survey results, but the referendum terms. Excuse me. The CSA staff has intention to plan a separate follow-up to this meeting, so you guys can ask more in-depth questions after you've really had a chance to absorb the material. So that means that I'll be posting not only the presentation you see here, but also the support video. So if you'd like to go back in and hear Anton cover specific questions, you can do so. So I'll be posting that information to our website. And just a reminder, the CSA board meeting that was planned for the 22nd of January at 3 o'clock, which is Tuesday, has been moved to the 29th of January, which at 3 o'clock as well, just as a logistics reminder for scheduling. So at that point, again, questions specifically related to the survey, please feel free to give those to Anton, and then Brett and I will address any specific referendum questions. So we'll go ahead and get started. A question over here to Terry.
Yeah.
Hey, Terry, how are you?
Good. How are you
Good.
doing? Anton, thank you for your presentation. I had a question for you because I was under the impression that the survey was being conducted by CSA and had not been given to an outside vendor, but I appreciate that you did that. My question for you is that you have indicated in several portions of your presentation that the point of the survey, from at least from the presentation you gave us, is to steer the survey respondents into the yes column. And I was wondering if that was the case with respect to each element of the referendum, or was it just a generalized steering us into the yes column? And if so, how were the questions? Were they, I'm not a statistician and I know nothing about surveys, but were your questions oriented and worded in such a way as to steer people into the yes column?
I wouldn't say steering. That's a wrong
Okay, I apologize.
answer.
Yeah.
The wrong phrasing on my end.
Okay.
So the idea really was to see if we can move the needle and to get a pulse of the community as a whole. And it was not that we tried to convince the community of specific referendum items. I think the idea was, where are we on those 4 suggested referendum items and terms, and or the board, and would it make sense to actually start now a referendum, or would we lose too many of the community people, too many people in the community before we actually get more information? Because they want to succeed in a referendum, but for that to happen, they may have to address some of the items. And I think they're thinking about taking off terms of the referendum or adding. It's just about, but we are not steering. And what we try to do in the design of the survey is that we're able to run the same survey instrument again, because that's just how we can actually compare apples to apples. So we try to find the wording which works in a way that we can run the same instrument again, that we can actually see where we moved the needle or where we didn't. But we didn't try to steer questions. That was not the intent of this survey.
Thank you.
Yes. Would you? One second.
I'm curious. Obviously, you can slice the data by full-time residents and part-time residents. And I just wondered, did you see any significant difference in the profiles and the responses of full-time residents, that is registered voters, and those that are not registered in Beaufort County?
We didn't slice it this way. We could just see this in the comments.
But you could slice it that way if you
we could
chose
slice
to.
it in. Yes, I believe it was question for 19. We did not go down this route yet, but we could, yes. So if Brett would come back to us and see how those differentiated in their answers, definitely we could do that, yes.
I need to ask for some clarification on the funding and the need. I think you had indicated that the total funding was 5 million or 5.5 million or something. And the way you phrased it, annually, I wasn't sure to interpret that as each year there was a $5 million budget and we were looking at 35 million over the course of the term, or was it the 5.5 million split divided into the 5-year term? What's the nut we're trying to get after?
Well, it's 2 components actually in that $5.5 million number. That's the total number of major repairs and replacements, as well as new items that you saw here, the landscaping, the additional road work that we're going to incur, the gate, and then the landscape maintenance. CSA generates about $3 million a year for that purpose already. Okay, so all we're talking about is the remaining balance, and that is an annual number over that 7-year period. So we're already generating have made available about 2.9 over the same period from existing revenues, okay, per year. So the shortfall per year is about 2.5, and the idea behind the referendum and the terms of the referendum are to get to the 2.5 shortfall.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've been wondering about this for quite some time. Doesn't the town of Hilton Head have some responsibility for our roads? Or are we completely on our own with our roads and our sewer and all of that?
The town has no responsibilities for roadways and sea ponds. As a matter of fact, we have responsibility for one roadway outside of Sea Pines, which is Greenwood Drive from the gate to Sea Pine Circle. So no, they have no road responsibilities inside of Sea Pines. We own the roads; they won't work on it. The state does, it's a private road; they're private roads, so they do not contribute to that. On the stormwater system, not the sewer, I'm assuming you're referring to that. The stormwater system is ours as well. The town collects some funds from the county, and we have access to those funds, and we have used those funds for several projects within Sea Pines, and we'll continue to do that. This portion is a shortfall of that funding availability. Now, I can tell you, Brian, that we're going to try to get those funds first. Okay, but having known our experience with that, they spend about $200,000, $250,000 a year on average in Sea Pines over the last few years, and we've gotten that number up significantly from where it was before. And the town is raising funds, and we're trying to work on a new stormwater agreement with the town, but I'm not anticipating that they're going to up that spend in Sea Pines significantly.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that's something that isn't completely clear to the community, that we are a private community in here. All of this is ours. I think really sometimes people tend to forget that it's, because I keep thinking, where the hell's all the tax money and this and that? And now I get it, honestly. Yeah. It's ours. It's a private community.
We'll take one from the webinar, and then we'll get this gentleman here in the second to back row.
Okay, so a question from the webinar. This question is from property owner Stuart Silver. He's asking two questions. How many CSA members are there? And of the 38% response, how many possible responses could we have gotten? So to Anton, just can you give us clarification on how many surveys we sent out via email? 7,800, I believe.
No, you put me on the spot, but I believe it was
74. Yeah, so it's right around that number of emails. And then question more specifically to Brett, noting CSA members.
It's about 5,800. There's a little variable in there, but we do send it out to, in that 5,800 plus number is, for example, residential dwelling units. That's the number that we work with. Some of that is single owner interest. So, for example, timeshare. So they have a single owner interest of multiple properties. They're in trust generally, so there's only one member, but they get to vote as many residential dwelling units as they have in an election. They do not get to do that in a referendum. They only get to vote one in a referendum. So hopefully that's helpful.
I think some of the lack of clarity in this involves the contribution by the commercial and resort, interests. As I understand it, these would presumably result in new documentation, new agreements, and that would change existing agreements. And I have far from a perfect knowledge of those existing agreements, but as I understand it, the resort is legally required to contribute 1% of revenue. For some reason, they have not been doing that, but we're now agreeing on, instead of a 0.5%, we have been collecting, and the 1% in the documents to go to 75%, presumably in perpetuity. The second thing is, as I understand it, that Sea Pines Resort, if they rent, a property, they do not pay a gate pass fee. Whereas if any other outside rental agency rents to somebody, that they have to pay $10 a week. So therefore, there's an imbalance. And I don't think that this is clearly communicated to the people. We have to resolve it. But I think the facts should be more clearly on the table.
Yeah, I think you'll see in our follow, we talked about follow-up to this. You're going to see hopefully some clarification for those items in a publication that we're going to send out based on those folks that need more information or know because of specific reasons. So we will be trying to clarify that in a documentation and get that out. But it's, if you've looked at our covenants, they're rather complicated. They're in depth. You are correct. This is an amendment to those covenants to try to clarify and reposition a lot of those things that are in there today. And those questions have come up. So we're trying to address those questions and provide that information back out.
Yes, and perhaps I'm not aware of this, but is there a document that shows the financial projection budget for the next 5 to 7 years of the CSA? Is that published, or will you be publishing that?
Yes.
And
it's not published today, I don't believe, Amanda, but it will be published.
This will be a projection in the next 5 to 7 years.
7 years.
Of budget.
Yes. Well, it's not a budget. It is a projection.
A projection,
yes.
Financial though, not just words.
Yes, absolutely.
Financial.
It will be financial.
Thank you.
Okay. George.
Yeah, Brett, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember we had an engineer come up and talk about our infrastructure here in Sea Pines, and he gave a very detailed description of the shortfall that we had. And I believe that he mentioned something of $5 million a year for a number of years that had to be in the budget for infrastructure. It's probably 4 to 6 months back. Time goes very quickly, but we did have an engineer here who was very specific about our needs. And I don't think that that number includes what his detail was. So I'd like to make sure that we look at that again.
That's
you
where
remember.
We're getting our numbers, George, and just so you know, and I'm not sure what engineer you're talking about, but certainly stormwater, we had Ray Pittman Engineering present. And I believe that number that he presented over there were 2 periods of time. I believe there was a 10-year, a 20-year, and a 30-year period of time. And in the first 10 to 20 years, that number was about 1.6 million, 1.7 million. But over the period of the 30 years, we were talking close to $40 million total.
Okay.
So those are the numbers that are in, and that's where we're pulling these numbers from for this purpose. To provide that specifically there. And we'll try to clarify that again. I think what we're going with when we do get the information out on the questions that we've seen, we need to give in line item or itemized information to some extent, itemized information, but certainly budgets and what percent of the money is going towards what kind of expense will be delineated in that publication out there. And it's all going to relate back to that stormwater study, to our reserve study, to other engineering and arborist analysis of sea ponds.
Okay, thank you.
I think you just answered this, Brett, but I'm going to ask it anyway because my mind is, anyway. If this referendum would pass, how would we be assured that the funds went exactly where they were supposed to go and didn't just go into a general pot to be used for anything?
I did not answer that. Okay. I did say, however, that we are going to answer that in our letter, in our information that we send out.
And has there been any thought to making this referendum capped after 5 years or 7 years, and also to making the referendum an add-on to the property assessment that we pay now, that the CPI would be continually on just the assessment, okay, without the addition.
Say that again. Make sure I understand the question.
All right. Is there been any thought to keeping our assessment the way it is now and going up the little bit every year that it goes up, and adding the referendum money to that, so that our base does not continually become a larger base, and capping it. That would be all one big.
There's been a lot of discussion about various different items, and that's why we wanted to do the survey, quite frankly, is to try to collect this and quantify the interest by the community about these specific items of the referendum. We're collecting that, as Anton said, we're collecting all those questions, and those are questions that are asked, and we're going to try to address them in what we can do. We're also going to try to address it, I think, from the board perspective. I can't speak for the board members, but I believe the intention by them is to adjust. That's why we did the survey. We're going to try to figure out what you want and try to put something in front of you that you would support, okay, by 75% or more, and try to resolve as much of this, concern as we can through the process. So we're soliciting that concerns. We're trying to quantify them, although, as Anton said, 60,000 words is hard to quantify from trying to get some messages from that on what we need to address. But that's what our objective is now, and that's what our communication for the future is, that we will be coming back and representing. We hope we can get to a successful referendum to address these needs. We think there's plenty of support to address the needs from what we've seen in the information already that we've collected, but we have some work to do, and we certainly need to do that.
Thank you.
Welcome. Terry, and then.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Brett, that this is a question for you, so forgive me. My question is that based on these survey results, it seems from just you're the expert, but it looks like the biggest trouble spot is the transfer tax, just from what I've seen up there, but I could be wrong. It just looks like that's your big problem. And my brief research is that a transfer tax by private entities is flatly against public policy in this state, with limited exception. And I'm wondering whether, given that that's the big trouble spot, whether all of this is going to be presented to Burr and Foreman, the new counsel for CSA, to make some determinations and help guide CSA so that we can get our funds without violating public policy.
Okay, so a couple things there. One is transfer fees are provided for not in the law, but they're not prohibited in the law for private communities who can assess. Okay, we have some things we have to do, which is referendum. I think what you're referring to is the public policy that some time ago disallowed transfers for public entities. So the town of Hilton Head has a transfer fee. They have a transfer fee that is generated now on every property that is sold on Hilton Head Island. That was permissible a long time ago, and the town passed an ordinance to allow them to do that. Okay, that is no longer permissible in South Carolina, but because they had already passed it, it continues on. Okay, private communities are separate and are considered separate, and there are some legislative actions out there that restrict. Most of it's about awareness back to the community, and as long as you support these methods, it's fine. I do want to talk about what you saw in the survey, though. It's a concern, and it's one of those things that we need to address. So we think that is one of the areas that is probably putting people in that either I don't support category, or I don't know category. So we're going to try to address that. Okay. Alex, and then we'll go to a webinar. She's coming behind you, Alex.
Thank you, Brett. Is there a target date for the presentation of revised proposed terms for the referendum?
I don't have a target date yet, no. We've talked about dates of trying to get this out, March 1 as far as the ballot, but I'm not sure how realistic that is at this point. You know, my concern, as Anton mentioned, is that if in fact we move forward with a referendum that will pass, that we measure that prior to us going out. So we're trying to figure out how we're going to best do that. As Anton mentioned, we may do a follow-up survey. We may just touch base on some things. We need to get some agreements amongst the board to make any modifications that we need to make, and we're going to work on that first. But you know, I've been working in Sea Pines for a while now, and I know that the only thing sure is the next meeting. So.
Okay. We have a question from the webinar, Brett. If that's okay. Okay. Question from the webinar from a property owner. If the community does not approve the necessary increased funding, how will the shortfall be addressed? In other words, what is Plan B?
Well, right now we've deferred expenses, but if we don't get some funding somehow to do some of these things, I think it's going to be up to the board to take a look at what we're currently doing. I mean, certainly we're going to have to see if there's an alternative method to do this, or we're going to have to look at the services we're currently providing and what are the priorities of those services. We believe, and I believe the board believes, that the current services provided and what we're trying to do here are necessary for the best interest of Sea Pines. But you're the ultimate decider on that. And if you say no, you say no. So we have to rethink and redo that. That's why it's important for us to get a successful referendum here to try to address these items. But again, you're the ones that are going to decide.
I have one more. This is from property owner Bob Pellegrino. Bob's question is the expense related to the Gallery of Shops project included in the projections and the shortfall, or will that be a separate project?
It's included in the current referendum items that are listed, and that was listed in here. So the funding that would be generated from the referendum addresses that gate, as well as a potential improvement to the Ocean Gate. Neither of those have been specifically itemized in the dollar amounts because we don't have plans developed for the Greenwood Gate facility at the Gallery of Shops. But we are in process of doing that to do that. But we know about what it's going to cost. I mean, we know square footage costs. It's not going to be a big building. It's going to be small. We know improvement costs. We do them all the time. So we've got some ballparks that are within the parameters of what we've presented here.
Thank you. Just a quick reminder, could you just make sure that if you're asking a question from the audience that they're stating their first and last name? Is a question from the webinar we've gotten.
Can we go to the back right here? And then we'll come back up to John.
Obviously, I'm Mary Janet Doonan. Obviously, all of the things that you mentioned that you've put into the proposal here are things that are necessary in one way or another to keep our community as beautiful as you've been keeping it. However, many people indicated that they needed more information on certain things. I assume that's part of your plan. You mentioned that the referendum that you have put up there is all or nothing, basically. All of the items at this point that you've put up there are going to be voted on as one. As you review this, and I know this would be a very hard decision to make, which pieces of the different areas would be reduced in one way or another based on the community input, so that you either reduce the total amount that you need or you put some things that might be needed on a little more deferred maintenance or improvement. I assume that's part of the discussion you're going to be doing.
It is part of the discussion, but I can't tell you what the outcome of that's going to be until we get to the end. I mean, it is certainly part of the discussion. We're looking at the items. We've been looking at the items. You know, can we do this a different way? One of the items that we found that actually reduced that we believe is going to reduce that 1.6 million annual for stormwater is that stormwater number was based off of contractors. So we have hired our own people to do things like storm drain clean out, and we purchased some equipment, and at least for last year we believe we made significant progress and saved money. but we're not sure exactly how much the rest of it is going to do, and how much that would be. So, are we going to manage it? Absolutely. Do we want to try to reduce those costs or to change some things as we go? Yes, but we have the plans that we have today. We've been working on those for 5 years to get to this point. And this is our best estimate right now. But will we continue to try to save money, to change things, to get equipment to last longer, or buildings to last longer, or roadways to last longer? Absolutely. So, a lot of this is based off engineering studies. That's based off of professional reviews of our assets and the replacement time of those assets. That's what we have today, but we have to plan for that. And we have to plan for that over time. So this is in accordance with those plans right now.
Thank you.
Okay. Question from the webinar. This is from property owner Ted Levitt. Ted says in his question, given the importance of the survey and this referendum, why has the property owners not received some sort of written summary of the survey responses since it closed over a month ago?
We just got the summary.
Yeah.
Christmas,
travel.
I was out of the country for
2.5 weeks.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yes, I saw my family. I'm sorry for that. No, but really, that's the reason. The change of the year and our renewed contract coming back to the country. That's why it took a while. Also, we did think about scheduling this meeting a week
ago. Yeah.
And we thought that, and that was good because on Tuesday last week I was still stuck in Amsterdam, so
right.
I couldn't have been here. So, and that's really the reason why this whole process took a bit longer than we actually wanted to. That is true. We wanted to have this turnaround much faster because of the importance of the topic. However, now when we're going to do the second turnaround or the second go around, that will be faster because it's just an ordinary year.
Right. Thank you, Anton. Appreciate it. Okay, one more follow-up question really quickly. I'm so sorry. This question is from property owner Lorraine Gilden. She is stating that they have a home in the Canvasback area, and they have, a road on a home on Canvasback Road, which is in need of drainage repair. They were told by a representative of CSA that the town of Hilton Head Island indeed has responsibility for the drainage repair on that road, and that the town plans to do that work during 2019. So more of just a statement.
Russell, is that correct? That's correct.
So Russell Fredericks, our director of maintenance.
So we are asking the town for some of these, and they will do some, but they don't have the 1.7 million a year allocated.
Right.
As I said, they're spending about a couple $100,000 a year on sea pines right now, and that spending again has been up significantly. So, they may have a responsibility, but their responsibility and all of their legislative actions is limited to their resources.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I would like to know where the funds came from for the 1.4 million for the gallery when we have a shortfall yearly of 2.5 million.
They came from reserve funds. John?
John Parsons, on the real estate transfer fee, do you have any experience or knowledge of what other communities have experienced in who pays the transfer fee, the buyer or the seller, and whether that has had any impact on the closing? That is the price of the house reduced as a result?
I haven't seen any detailed analysis of that.
I think
or
we need
heard
that
of
information.
that anybody has compiled specifically.
I
don't have a way to pull that, John, because it's other communities and they have not provided anything. They have indicated that it's in almost every case that I've spoken to management or board members of those communities, they've indicated that that transfer fee has provided them with necessary improvements, and they believe it has enhanced their values.
Well, I'm startled by the response. I think we need more information for people to understand what this is.
Well,
44%
generally speaking, these, and I can't speak to everyone because they're all over the board. I mean, these things, transfer fees run from fixed fees to percentage of sales to all kinds of different things. So I don't want to summarize too much because they're so unique in each community. But our intention would be to try to do something where the transfer fee applies to the buyer, and that would be in the documentation and covenant amendment.
Thank you.
Let's go to the back, and then we'll come up to this gentleman again.
A follow-up to the question of the young lady on my right. Did the community ever approve the purchase of the gallery shops, or was it a board decision?
It was a board decision.
Thank you.
This gentleman, second row.
You mentioned about what the town pays or doesn't pay for in the sea pines. I wonder how that compares to A, other plantations, and B, our share of the revenue to the town, because we have a large share of non-resident owners. We pay almost something like double the property taxes of the residents. So I would imagine we are a very big contributor revenue source for the town. And do we get our fair share back, particularly as in comparison to other plantations? And by the way, I thank the board for their efforts. I know this is really a tough. I really.
Well, some of them are over there. So the town has. I don't know how deep you want me to go into the town, but the town has a variety of revenue streams. Okay, the roads. They have very limited roads, both publicly or outside these plantations, as well as I don't think they have any roads inside of any of the gated plantations. So they don't do roads pretty much. Now they have accepted some roads down in South Forest Beach, again, not gated community, and they're doing those things now. They've done some stormwater work in conjunction with those roads. But by and large, they stay outside. Stormwater, however, is a specific area that they have set up a separate fund for. It comes through a stormwater fee specifically on your county bill, and that fee is then collected by the county. County takes their share out, and then they pass on some portion to the town, and then the town takes that and sets out their priorities. So some of that is bonded, so the revenue goes to pay bonds. Some of that goes to their administrative cost and covering their engineers and people that are in their stormwater to help make determinations on distribution of that and priorities. And in the end, we do get some, but they don't prorate it. If you're asking that, they don't prorate it based on contribution.
They would not prorate, but the question, I guess, in part, what evolved from this, is there any way to put political pressure on the town to assume responsibility?
We have a town council meeting all the time. So,
well, yeah, but I mean, I think there's a fairly significant voting block in Sea Pines, but and in other gated communities.
Yes.
To get the town.
I can tell you a couple things about the town and the town council. I think there's some opportunity, and John McCann, our new mayor, is focused on this. I had a meeting with John last week with all of the community managers about our agreement. Okay. They wanted to go to a boilerplate agreement for all. We are pushing back hard.
Okay.
And we have another meeting coming up with the town to discuss that. So we are actively trying to get access to these funds. And from my perspective, is get a commitment from the town is one of the larger issues that we want to pursue.
I would think that might be an avenue to mitigate some of this, to get them to assume. I know we don't want to give up what I'll call local control, but something like stormwater sounds like that's a public domain type of thing, and maybe there's some avenue to get more of a contribution through the town or the county.
And just so you know, one of the ways they have gotten into this is through the easements. So most of the stormwater is built on utility easements. So public funds have gone into utilities. So that's how they're getting some of this funding. But we're trying to build in Mayor McCann in our discussion, he's trying to get, he appreciated what Sea Pines has already done. Just having that engineering study that we did, there are 2 communities on Hilton Head Island that have that, and none of them have gone as far as we did to understand the details and the needs. And right now he's trying to figure out what the size of his problem is, because they're not sure. We've given them information, and so they know the size of our problem. But for him to be able to support that and to do things, and it is political pressure. It is communication to them. It is at a high level as well, because it's the people that are raising the funds and setting the fees that are going to need to make the decisions. Yes.
Question via webinar. This question is from property owner Bill Pellegrino. The question is, the previous referendum included increasing the number of rooms at the inn at Harbortown in substantial modification to the Harbortown area. Will that be the case in this referendum, or is that completely separate?
Completely separate. Charlie?
Charlie Miner. Brett, 5 years ago when you came here, we didn't have a reserve study, we didn't have a stormwater study, we didn't have a tree study, and a few surprises came along in the process. So as you look forward with this referendum, is there any contingency for things you may not know about in the next 5 years, or is this just a bare bones necessity for the things we've already identified?
What we would like to do, Charlie, and I don't want to speak for the board, but we have identified these needs over the last 5 years. Okay, we haven't identified others to go out and ask for. So this is pretty trim to the needs. I mean, there's some money, as I think we talked about it in one of the questions, there is some excess funding that this would generate over about that, but it's pretty minimal, and it's all going back into the reserve accounts for future responsibilities of roads down the road, roads down the line, in time. So, there's not a lot there, and I wouldn't suggest that we should put anything in here until we know what the needs are. We're asking for a lot already.
Susan Mazer, just an observation. A comment was made earlier that perhaps Sea Pines residents aren't aware that we are fully responsible for the infrastructure, the improvements, and the maintenance. And yet, for 4 or 5 months out of the year, it doesn't feel to me, as a residential property owner, like this is solely on me because of the influx of short-term visitors. And given the way the proposed revenue is distributed across the various entities, it also doesn't feel very equitable.
Yeah, well, and one of the questions was about that specifically, is where does the revenue come from in Sea Pines, and where does it go? And we need to address that specifically. I can tell you that today, residential assessments generate about 50% of the revenues for CSA. So there's a whole other revenue stream coming from gate fees, from investments, from what else is it, David? Resort contributions, as well as some of our agreements with outside entities that pay fees for really minimal kinds of things for marketing purposes and utilities. So,
can I make a comment? It's Mark Griffith. There is a perception there that there's an imbalance. There was an analysis done, I think Stu Rodman, our now chairman of the Beaufort County Commission, gathered some ad valorem tax data. And we property owners represent about 95% of the real estate value inside our gates. And frankly, I think it's unfair, although I'm a full-time resident, to differentiate between I, who am a full-time resident, I presume you are as well, and someone sitting next to you that might be a property owner that rents. They're both property owners. And we represent 95% of value. And it would seem logical to me, if we represent 95% of the value, that we probably ought to be responsible for 95% of the cost. And if you look at some charts that Brett has published over the years, X the gate fee, that's about what the other contribution is, about 5%. So I think it's probably already equitable. Just one person's thoughts.
Others? You got it, David?
Brett, it was stated that we are currently deferring expenses, and that would be on our current existing function. And I'm
well-
thinking other than things like Greenwood Drive, which would come under the proposal.
Right.
But I'm not clear, is there a shortfall currently, a dollar amount shortfall of our normal function without those add-ons? And what's the difference between what expenses are being deferred and which ones are coming out of the reserve funds?
Well, a couple things. As you saw, we're doing improvements all the time. As you saw, we've got about $3 million a year of available funds for replacement of existing infrastructure, those kinds of things. Many of these studies just identified, and I can't remember who said it, about Charlie talked about having a reserves fund for the study done for the first time. We had a reserve study done before that. We just didn't use it. So that we had different spreadsheets with different people looking at different numbers, and we did our own analysis for years and years and years, but we never touched into, okay, who's going to dredge the lagoons? Who's going to replace the landscaping specifically? We have provisions for things like some landscaping units, but we don't have, and those are related to things like pipes and irrigation heads, but not plant material. Not storm damage and repair of our trees and shrubbery that's been damaged out there. So, some of the things, what we know in a reserve study is it doesn't cover everything. So we've tried to identify those things, and that's what you're seeing here that are not covered by that reserve study, and put them into a plan that you get to approve or disapprove.
Thanks. Relative to that, the Plan B reference on the webinar implies simplistically that should this referendum not pass, we would be high and dry, in dire straits of needing to cut back our existing function to a great degree, or else come up with some other whatever.
Yeah, if you don't do it, if you don't have the money, it's going to be hard to do.
Thank you.
Welcome. Right here. Can anybody get there?
Hi. If I could for a minute go back to Mark, could you help me understand what I think I heard you say is 95% of the value of the property owned in Beaufort County?
No, not in Sea Pines.
Okay, in Sea Pines.
Inside our gates.
Okay.
If you look at the tax value of all the real estate and pull out that which is we property owners, that's 95%. The commercial interest and the resort interest inside our gate represent about 5%.
Okay.
And I can get you that calculation that Stu Rodman did for
Well,
us.
I was trying in my mind to jump from that to the lady's point of to residents who are here year round in the short-term people. It would seem
I'm just
like,
talking about residential real estate, and that's not differentiating that which is short-term versus rental versus that which is owned.
Okay.
Our belief is that about 40% of our property owners are either permanent residents or don't rent their properties. That there are the remainder, whether it's short-term or intermediate term, but in one way or another, quite often there's someone other than the property owner using their property. And I think that's about 1,500 properties. Is that right?
Yeah, there's about 1,800 currently that are under some sort of a rental program.
Right.
And then I think the numbers are probably closer to 40% that are permanent residents. And I think we got some of that verified here, although we anticipate that, some of the The folks that have investment property or second homeowners are not as engaged as our permanent residents. So we may have a little disproportionate amount of permanent residents who are taking the survey. But I mean, you saw the number and the percentages, Don. So that's
Okay. So is there a confidence level that the 1/4 to 1/3 of the use of this reservoir of our sea pines, where the 3 to 4 months that they're here, are they paying their fair share?
I don't know how to get there, Don. I mean, I guess a property owner pays an assessment. That's the way our covenant is written. And there's no restriction on, in most, there are a few regimes where there are rental restrictions. Very few. Is the fact that they might have a different user occupying their property 25, 26 weeks out of the year versus themselves occupying it, does that put more strain on our infrastructure? I don't know that it does, but I can't quantify it. A user is a user, whether it's you or I, or whether it's a renter of ours. Maybe it's the same. I don't know.
Thank
Mark,
you.
I think Charlie had a.
Thank you.
Charlie.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that we all scratch our heads and wonder where all these people come from in the summertime, and where are they going? They're going to rent rooms in properties that are owned by residents here. We have 1,800 residents here who rent out their properties. And they don't rent out one room per property. They rent out 2, 3, 5, 6 rooms per property. So what you're looking at compared to something like the resort, who has 70 rooms to rent out as the resort, not as a property owner. I realize they manage some of the properties, but the tourists come to occupy houses that are owned by residents. So that's the dilemma we have. This is a huge rental property ownership community.
Police.
Felice Lamarca. Mark, given your line of reasoning, 95% of the cost, if we get 95% of the vote.
David, right behind you.
Felicia, let me
go ahead.
I hear you, and if that's the way this community was built back in the late 50s, it would be just that. But that is not the way it was built. That's not the way Charles Fraser structured our covenants. And no, I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that. I said, if you're talking about fairness and share, we residents make up 95% of the value in this community. It wasn't about voting. I would love to be fair. I would love to be fair, but that's not the world we live in. But do recognize one thing, and I know you know this. We have someone that we must answer to before we hold any referendum. And that isn't changing, we are told. Everything that we bring before you has to be approved by Riverstone, or we don't bring it to a vote. So I don't care for that either, but those are the cards we've got dealt.
Okay. A lot of people on the webinar are not hearing this. So
None of them are hearing us.
let's take this gentleman, then we'll go to the webinar for a couple questions.
Okay, so question from the webinar is from,
Hold on.
I'm so sorry.
This gentleman first.
I'm so sorry, my apologies. I didn't see a
Michael Wolf. I have 2 questions, not related. At the community coffee in December, there was a slide that showed the non-resort commercial interest contributed about $89,000 a year in assessments in 2016, I believe. They were going to double their contribution through assessments. but in the average annual revenue after the referendum, they were only contributing $98,000 a year.
And that's a clarification point that we need to provide. Okay, so there is a non-covenant related fee that is charged to tenants that is by a gate agreement that is currently in place. That is the fee that is going to double. Okay, that generates about $20,000 a year currently, a little bit more than that, and that would double to a new amount, and it would be part of the covenant.
So when you say they're going to double their assessment, that's a little deceptive.
Well, it's not saying they're going to double, it's going to create an assessment.
Go back and look at the slide. It
Sure.
says they're going to increase their assessment by 100%.
Sure.
From the December coffee, community coffee presentation.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure what that slide said specifically, but there's currently an annual fee that tenants pay for access for owners and employees. There's no agreement, there's no statement for an assessment in the covenants currently for tenants. Okay? There is none. It's for business land owners.
That was not made clear at the community coffee.
Well, that's why we're trying to make these clear.
Okay. Second question. In all of your projections, you show no revenue coming in from any of the commercial entities as a result of the transfer fee or the transfer tax.
That's correct.
Whatever you want to call it, because you don't anticipate any transfers.
Well, we didn't want to plan them. We don't have any significant record of transfers that we could forecast.
Going forward, suppose the LLC that owns Sea Pine Center sells a portion of their ownership, an equity interest in Sea Pine Center, to a new owner. The LLC doesn't change, ownership doesn't change, stock changes. Do you feel confident that you will be able to ever capture any revenue from a transfer of stock or a transfer within an LLC that controls property or a commercial interest?
Yes. And that's a
Will
provision.
that be clarified in
the language, for the purposes of trying to, get a survey out, we didn't put all the language of everything in there. And I think there's some concerns about that kind of thing. We need to explain it. But that any part of a transfer fee would have that kind of a transaction in there. Now there are challenges to transfer fees. I got to tell you, there's a lot of them. So, we're working through those, and we've tried to identify on the other side of that, how how do your children get your property at some point in time, all of those things. But, in the end, as you saw, the transfer fee was a challenge for people to understand, for the questions that they had, those kinds of things. So we put the initial terms out there, as we said. Lots of other properties, lots of other communities have that out there, and that's something that we presented. Doesn't mean it's going to go through, and it is a challenge for us.
It's also a challenge to satisfy state law, which
we're fine with state law. We've already had that checked. So we're in good shape.
Last, question. I said I had two. I have three. You've laid out a really strong case for about $2.5 million of spending over the next 7 years each year. You've given us a proposal that will generate about $3 million a year forever. What's your plan for year 8 with the additional $3 million?
Well, right now,
was any consideration given to a limited year assessment that sunset at some point once the infrastructure needs have been taken care of?
But as I said, when we look at the stormwater and the landscape matters and the storm damage for the trees, those continue on well past the 8 years. There are items like gate improvements that do sunset. So, determining what that needs to be. And again, we're talking about a 7-year forecast with numbers changing as we move forward. We believe this is the right number at this time, but those things can change down the road. The referendum and the initial terms didn't set a sunset on that. And that's a question that's come up in our questions, and we have to address it.
Question over here, Brett.
Yes.
question from a property owner. Isn't it true that we currently have the lowest assessment of all private communities on the island? And because of the bargain rate in Sea Pines, we've left lots of maintenance we couldn't afford slide. Isn't it also true that even if the higher assessment rate, we will still be among the lowest fee on the island? And if we don't pass a referendum raising revenue and have to keep putting it off maintenance, at some point our community will continue to degrade. If that's the case, do we really have a choice? How long can we let our proverbial roof leak before we have to spend the money to fix it? So, not a really a question, more of a statement. My apologies.
Well, the one thing I do want to correct,
Statements are
Shipyard
okay.
does have a lower of the communities that we're looking at that are of a significant, obviously we have inside of Sea Pines by ourselves, we have other communities in here. We have multifamily communities in here that have assessments in their own regulations and those types of things. But from a transfer fee perspective, for the large scale communities on the island, from a assessment perspective, we are the second lowest currently of the set that we have, and we would remain that under the terms of this initial proposal. Felice, and then we'll take care of that.
But I think you have to also acknowledge and tell us that none of those communities have a gate fee that allow visitors in. So, I don't know that this is anywhere in writing, but as long as I've been here, it was my understanding that the gate fee helped defray our assessments. That being the case, we acknowledge that we are not like every other community on the island. Sure. So to say we should do this because they do is not fair.
Well, that's not what we're saying. We're presenting it to you because this is a way to raise funds that are competitive out there with other communities, even though we may be a very different community. There are very few communities out there that I know of anywhere, let alone Hilton Head Island, that generate the revenues that we generate off of admission or gate fees.
And
but we do have
to.
a couple of those out there.
And we need to,
Yeah,
because
we
we have so. I don't care if you rent in Palmetto Dunes, you're going to come into Sea Pines when you're visiting here. Okay? So as a professional, I know that. It's a big draw, and that's why we have the gate fee to help us with our infrastructure costs.
Sure.
And the other communities don't have that because they don't have that traffic.
Agreed.
So that needs to be said.
It's already counted for in the funds.
All right, but I would like everyone to understand that's a big difference between the other communities that have a transfer fee.
I think we are all pretty aware of what we have visa traffic and revenues from gate fees.
The other part of this is that you're going for a pretty big transfer fee. You're going for half of 1%. The town is a quarter of 1%. So no one's ever asked the question, why did we do this when many of the other communities are only a quarter of 1%? That means that the buyer or the seller, whoever pays for it, is paying 0.5% instead of 0.75. So
0.25.
I'm adding them together, the 0.5 and the 0.25 that a buyer ends up paying. The town.
Oh, the towns. I'm sorry.
And Sea Pines. So what thought was behind going for the larger number?
That was the recommendation from, I believe, our initial task force that recommended through our finance committee to the board, and the board put it into the initial terms and have presented it to the community for input. So we're getting input on it, and we're going to need to respond. This lady right here, please.
Barbara Ernie, I have a question for Anton. On the survey, several of the questions, it was either yes, you've heard of this, no, you haven't, or you need more information. But there were always over 1,000 people that skipped that question. Have you tried to figure out why they skipped it?
They skipped just a specific set of questions. And if we just quickly look into this one again.
Hold on for 1 second, Anton. That's me. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you're back. Yep.
Yes. So you see, that's this one. All the follow-up questions here, they have this big skip rates. Can you see them here with with 1,386 who skip? Because here we have 1,372 people. You don't even see the follow-up questions. If you go prior to that, the skip rates are rather low. Can you see? Skip 13. Okay. So, or we have here, I believe that's this question here. There's one with skipped 50, and that was just a lot of text. I believe there's some people who didn't want to read everything, so the skip rate is there higher. But for the follow-up, it's the specific set of questions who were. Then a big portion of people didn't even see this set of questions, and that's why the skip rate.
Okay. Thank you.
We have a question from the webinar as well.
Michael, then we'll go.
My name is Michael Tucker. Brett and I co-chaired the Strategic Planning Committee. Some of the members of that committee are in the room here. One of the things I'd just like to simply say to all of us here is that when we started that process, we looked at what would we like to have that will make this community a stellar community. And we put those on a sheet. And then we started looking at those things that we need to have regardless of what ornaments you put on in terms of amenities. If you don't have the strong foundation, be the infrastructure, the repair and the replacement, it doesn't do any good to put a nice ornament on the tree if it's not a solid base tree. Things like a community room where we didn't have to limit to 124 the number of property owners who would want to come to a meeting such as this. One thing that we looked at that was on our list was a community pool that's been asked for years and years. So these are nice amenities that we've looked at that were possibilities that we just pushed away because we knew we had to have the funding to fix the basic foundation before we started putting more amenities into the community. Thank you.
Let's do the webinar, then we'll go to John. Okay.
Thanks, Brett. I will address two questions that have been asked. So the question that was related a bit earlier to discussion related to gate fees, the property owners are asking, are we too dependent on gate fees and the amount of money we collect from gate fees?
Depends on who you ask.
Right. Okay, and the next question from different property owner, this question is from Rich Stouffer. Other than gate fees, have we considered other ways to generate more revenue from those visiting or vacationing in Sea Pines rather than rely on property owners, the resort, or the commercial interests to fund our shortfall?
I haven't seen, we've talked about some fees. It went through the task force. They were, when we looked at the potential, or at least the task force, they thought it was fairly nominal. And that was fee increases for various services, depending on what those are. But we don't generate a lot of interaction other than on the trolleys with the tourism traffic specifically. But do we think about it? Absolutely.
Mark Griffith, I'm going to talk to you a minute from a board perspective. In my 5th year, you're chairman. The takeaway this past week, the finance committee approved the nearly 17 million as the number that we need, the minimum we need over the next 7 years. We know we have to pass this. I don't think there's any question that there are needs out there. It's how do we get there? The purpose of the survey wasn't, Terry, to steer anybody. It was to see take a temperature. Over the coming weeks, from this survey, from the comments that you all are making today, from that 138 pages of narrative that we got back from the survey, the finance committee, the executive committee, and the board are going to weigh what is the best way to get to yes. And we're gonna put something forward. You'll know very quickly after we know what that plan is. It's going to be up to Brett and Amanda I think we've sold the need, but it's going to be up to Brett and Amanda to reach out to. There's 60% of us are not here. And if you looked at those numbers, we got 38% response. Where do you think those other 60% are probably predominantly lying? So we've got to get the word out to those of us that don't live here and are not sitting in this audience. How many people are on webinar? Okay, so we've got to reach our non-residents to help support getting this approved. If transfer fee needs to come off the table, I think that's probably the least understood, probably the easiest piece of revenue to get to if we could get the community to understand. But it may take too long to educate everyone to have that on the table on this referendum. We're talking to the resort, continuing to talk to resort about a larger contribution, but we don't control that. They've decided to go and are willing to go to 0.75. I think they should go to 1%. Steve knows that. We've asked him. He's in having that considered with his board. But let's face it, I mean, whether the resort pays 0.75% or 1%, it's not terribly material in the scheme of things. And whether our commercial interests pay $49,000 or $89,000 doesn't go very far to fill in that bucket. It's all going to come down to us. And how do we meet this obligation over the next 7 years? So we're going to come back to you in the next weeks with a modified proposal based on this feedback, and we'll hope that it'll be something that the community will support. Thank you.
Before we go on, Anton is leaving. So if your question is related to the survey, the data, the questions, the collection, I'd like to get those hands up real quick. If not, we'll let them go. John, did you have a question for Anton?
No, not a question. I had a comment before and didn't quite have an opportunity to make it. To the point made by several of you concerned about having the continuation of a transfer fee or any other funding for infrastructure replacement. That's not going away. We can't be like our state governments and federal governments who build things for billions of dollars and then forget all about the fact that these wonderful structures have a useful life. It's not forever. That's true with our roads here. Back in 2007, we had the same problem. We were unable to get a similar referendum passed in 2008 because primarily we had the recession. We don't have that today, ladies and gentlemen. We have a problem. We need to fund it. It's not going away, and their computations are made from real data. They take a road, it gets classified, says how many years that's going to be useful to us. You can plan to know in advance how much funding you're going to need in order to do it. That's what they have done. What I hear is you don't really believe it. You don't seem to trust people who are doing their job. These guys are trying to look after your interest and trying to prevent you from being in a situation where if we have another disaster like we have had with our hurricanes, we don't have to cough up special assessments to be able to take care of a unscheduled replacement, which involved many parts of our infrastructure as opposed to just being planned over time for their useful life. I beg you, look into the details, listen to your leadership, look at the work that has been done. It's not, they are speaking the truth to you. You may not like it, but man, you better do something about it. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to maintain our plantation the way that it should be and that you want it to be. Thank you.
This lady in the back row, then we'll come back to the gentleman.
Kate Emmert. I totally agree with the gentleman who just spoke. I totally support the board. I believe the board has done an outstanding job in research, trying to keep fees down, et cetera, et cetera. And I do know that costs will not go down in the future. So if they're projecting something that is nominal now, the costs are not going to go down 2 and 3 years from now. So you've got to believe that this is nominal. I also just texted a realtor friend of mine and said, what about transfer fees? Because I've got, over the years, we have bought various properties that we've always had a transfer fee. And it varies, but it has always, in our experience, been paid by the seller. And I need somebody financially oriented, maybe that's you, Charlie Miner, to figure out 1/2 of 1%. If you sold a house here in Sea Pines for $800,000, I think that's only $4,000.
That's correct.
And in Wexford, no matter what price you pay a $20,000 transfer fee and it's the buyer who does it. The buyer who does it, you pay a $20,000 transfer fee. So I think even questioning a transfer fee at 1/2 of 1%, I mean that's so reasonable. And we have to support this community so it does not degrade. It needs to continue to upgrade as opposed to downgrade. And I think we totally need to support the Riverstone Group. They have done so much for this community.
Thank you. John? Let's do one more.
One thing it would help me, and I think might help in communicating, is there's a lot of controversy, in my opinion, between the cost benefit of residents versus visitors. Okay, and I think if we broke the revenue between what the property owners contribute and what the visitors contribute, which includes all the gate fees, all the resort, all the community stuff, we would find that there is a reasonable balance that's not apparent in anything I've seen as between resident and visitors. That we might pay a half or even less as resident, just pure property owners. That's one, and also as part of the increased revenue. Obviously, it looks to me like most of the increase in revenue is going to come from the increase in the assessment and the real estate transfer fee. I would appreciate knowing how much of the increase was coming out of what I'll call the visitor pocket.
That'll be included in the information you receive via the mail, and we'll also email that presentation.
You understand what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, I understand. And we presented it before, just in different formats.
I've never seen it. I've been here 42 years, so I've never seen that.
Okay.
I'm a non-resident for 42 years.
I'll do one more. Okay, back in the back row, please.
Free piece of psychiatric advice. Most of us agree that what is needed is needed. However, there's so much feeling in the community that you guys are not our friends, you're our enemies. I would suggest to you that you ask yourself, why does that exist? And I don't think it's just because everybody's cheap. I think maybe you got to look a little bit at how you do what you do so that we feel that you're on our side and that we're not against you. I think everything would be a lot better.
I don't think you're against me. So, okay. Thank you very much. We've got more coming. We do have a board meeting on the 29th, correct? At 3 o'clock here. Anything else to announce, Amanda? Okay. Thank you very much.